The last song of the evening drifted through the living room. Soft and slow, the kind of melody that lingered like perfume after a good night. Candles burned low, catching little glimmers of glass and laughter that had already faded into memory. The party had ended, and the quiet felt like a sigh after a long day. Emily stood near the kitchen counter, gathering empty glasses and half-eaten desserts. Her husband, Mark, had gone upstairs to rest, exhausted from hosting. It had been his idea to invite friends from college, people they hadn't seen in years. The night had been cheerful, filled with stories and old jokes that made everyone laugh. Yet, beneath Emily's polite smiles, there was a silence. No one noticed. A quiet ache she'd carried for months. She looked around the room, at the decorations she'd carefully chosen. The string lights she'd hung with such care. Everything looked beautiful, but for some reason, she felt detached, like watching someone else's life from the outside. That's when she noticed. James still there? He was sitting on the edge of the couch, his jacket folded beside him, hands loosely clasped. James was Mark's old friend from college, the calm, observant one who never said too much but always listened deeply when he did. Everyone liked him. He had that kind of warmth that didn't demand attention but quietly earned it. "You don't have to stay and help," Emily said with a small smile. "Stacking plates, I don't mind," James replied, his voice even, gentle. "It's quiet now. Feels nice after all the noise." His tone was thoughtful, and for a moment Emily looked up, catching the soft sincerity in his eyes. She nodded, unsure what to say next. They began cleaning together, the clinking of dishes filling the silence. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, and the night seemed to hum with something unspoken. Emily had always liked evenings like this, calm, ordinary moments where life felt slower, almost cinematic. But lately, even the stillness carried a sense of emptiness. Mark had been distant, caught up in work and endless meetings. Conversations had turned into brief exchanges, reminders, grocery lists, small talk before bed. Nothing was wrong, exactly. Just quiet. To quiet. James broke the silence. "You've built a beautiful home," he said, looking around. Emily smiled faintly. "Thank you. It's been a few years in the making. It feels warm," he added, "like it's lived in, not just decorated." She laughed softly. "That's the nicest thing anyone said tonight." For a moment, there was a pause, not awkward, just thoughtful. The kind of stillness where both people seemed to be listening to the same invisible rhythm. James placed the last glass on the counter. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emily blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, almost as if he regretted asking. "You just seemed a little somewhere else tonight." Her heart gave a small, unexpected tug. No one had noticed that. Not even Mark. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess. Hosting always takes more energy than I expect." "Okay," but James didn't look convinced. He gave a small nod, respectful. But his expression said more, the kind of understanding that comes without words. The clock ticked softly in the background. Outside, a light drizzle began tapping against the windows. Emily felt the air shift, not with tension, but something gentler, familiar, honest. She suddenly realized how long it had been since someone really looked at her, not as a wife, not as a hostess, but simply as a person. The thought startled her, and she turned away. Pretending to fix the candles, James picked up his coat, preparing to leave. "You sure you're okay if I head out?" he asked, his tone considerate. "Of course," she said, forcing lightness into her voice. "Thank you for helping clean up. That was really kind of you." He smiled faintly. "You always were the one keeping things together." "Mark's lucky." The words hung in the air, not heavy, not suggestive, just sincere. And yet they lingered longer than she expected. Emily watched him walk to the door, the sound of rain growing steadier outside. For a brief moment, she thought he might say something else, but he only offered a gentle nod before stepping into the night. When the door closed, Emily stood there for a long time. The lights felt too bright, the room too still. She ran a hand across the counter, tracing the faint circles left by glasses and laughter. In that silence, she realized how much she missed feeling seen. And though she didn't know it yet, that small, quiet moment, that ordinary night, would be the start of a conversation she would never forget. Long after James left that night, Emily sat alone on the couch, listening to the soft rhythm of the rain. The house felt still, wrapped in a quiet that seemed almost thoughtful. She tried to focus on the steady hum of the dishwasher, the clock ticking faintly from the hallway, but her mind had already drifted somewhere else. James's kindness, his steady presence had stirred something long buried beneath years of routine. It wasn't about him, not exactly. It was about what he reminded her of. A time when life felt more alive, when conversations mattered, when she'd believed small moments could change everything. She closed her eyes, and memories surfaced like gentle waves. It was more than 10 years ago. A different city, a smaller apartment that always smelled of coffee and fresh paint. Emily had just started her first teaching job, then nervous, hopeful, and endlessly tired. Mark had been her anchor back then. They were newly married, still figuring out what it meant to share a life. Their apartment was small, their dreams enormous. They'd spend evenings on the floor with takeout boxes and laugh about everything. How the sink always leaked, how the heater rattled like an old bus. Those were the days when love felt simple, held together by shared hope rather than schedules. But life, in its quiet way, always moved faster than they expected. Mark took a demanding job at a marketing firm. Emily buried herself in lesson plans and school meetings. Slowly, laughter gave way to long silences filled with exhaustion. Then, one spring afternoon, she met James for the first time. It was at a reunion Mark had organized for his college friends. Emily remembered how nervous she'd been, not because of the guests, but because she hadn't been herself for a while. She missed the easy confidence she once carried. When James arrived, he'd greeted everyone with the same calm smile he still had now. There was something grounded about him, a quiet steadiness that didn't need to impress. He was the kind of person who noticed the small things others overlooked. During the reunion, Emily had stepped out to the garden to get some air. That's where James found her, standing beneath the string lights, holding a glass of lemonade, staring up at the fading sunset. "Too loud in there?" he'd asked gently. She'd laughed softly. "I guess I'm not as social as I used to be." He'd nodded, standing beside her without speaking for a moment. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Then he'd said, "Sometimes I think the best part of a party is the quiet after everyone stops talking." Emily had smiled at that. It was a simple comment, but it made sense in a way few things did. They talked for a while after that about teaching, about travel, about how people change over time. Nothing extraordinary, yet she remembered every word. He had listened with genuine interest, not just polite attention. And when she spoke, he looked at her as though her words carried weight. It had been a long time since she'd felt that kind of understanding. Over the years that followed, she'd see James occasionally at birthdays, at small gatherings, or quick visits when he came into town. Their conversations were always friendly, always appropriate, but filled with a quiet warmth she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't attraction in the romantic sense. It was more like recognition, the comfort of meeting someone whose mind moved in a similar rhythm. But life, as it always does, continued moving forward. Mark's job grew more demanding. Emily's work consumed her time, and James eventually moved to another city. The distance turned their rare conversations into brief messages, polite, infrequent, fading like a song she once loved but no longer heard. Still, sometimes when Emily walked home after school on cool evenings, she would think about that garden moment, the soft lights, the sound of laughter in the distance, and that calm voice saying, "The best part of a party is the quiet after everyone stops talking." It had stayed with her, echoing faintly through the years now. Sitting in her silent living room after another party, she realized how that same quiet had returned, only this time it felt heavier. She thought about how people drift apart, not through choice, but through the slow pull of days that turn into years. How the version of herself that once dreamed freely had quietly slipped away, replaced by a woman who smiled out of habit and forgot what it felt like to be truly known. Outside, the rain softened into mist. She stood and walked to the window, watching droplets trail down the glass. Somewhere out there, life went on, cars passing, lights flickering, time moving as it always had. Emily wondered if James ever thought of those small moments too. Not with longing, but with that quiet nostalgia that comes when something once meaningful still whispers in the back of your mind. She didn't know it yet, but the next time their paths crossed, that echo from the past would rise again, not to rekindle old memories, but to remind her of something she had almost forgotten about herself. The morning after the party, the house was unusually quiet. Sunlight crept softly through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the living room floor. Emily moved slowly through the house, gathering the last of the dishes, replaying the evening in her mind, the laughter, the warmth, and that final conversation that lingered longer than it should have. James's words, "Mark's lucky," echoed gently, not because of what they meant, but because of how they were said. There had been no hidden tone, no meaning beneath the surface. It was simple sincerity, and somehow that was what stayed with her. Days passed and life slipped back into its usual rhythm. Mark left early for work, came home late, and talked mostly about meetings, numbers, and deadlines. Emily smiled, listened, and filled in the silence with her own small updates about school, the students, the ordinary rhythm of her days. But inside, she felt a quiet restlessness, not for excitement or change, but for something more subtle, understanding, connection, a feeling she hadn't realized. She missed until that night. One Friday afternoon, about a week later, Emily stopped by a small cafe near the school. It was a place she often visited, quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, where the coffee always smelled faintly of cinnamon. She liked to sit by the window and grade papers, watching people walk by as the sky dimmed into evening that day. As she opened her laptop and reached for her mug, she froze. Across the cafe, at a corner table by the window, sat James. He looked much the same, thoughtful, calm, a little more tired around the eyes. He was reading something on his phone, a half-finished cup of coffee beside him. The sight made Emily's breath catch, not with surprise alone, but with that quiet disbelief that comes when life folds in on itself, bringing the past gently into the present. Before she could decide whether to wave or stay unnoticed, he looked up. Their eyes met. And just like that, the years, the distance, silence, all seemed to pause. James's face softened into a small, genuine smile. He stood, walked over, and said with that same quiet warmth, "Emily." She laughed softly, half embarrassed, half relieved. "I was just thinking about you the other day," she said. "Good things, I hope," he replied, smiling wider. They found themselves sitting together, conversation flowing more easily than either expected. It began with small talk, how long it had been, how busy life had become, how everyone seemed to have drifted in their own directions. But beneath the casual words was a quiet undercurrent, the shared awareness that something deeper had always existed between them, unspoken yet unmistakably familiar. James told her about his recent move back to the city, a new job that had brought him closer to old friends again. Emily listened, genuinely happy for him. She told him about her work at the school, her students, how teaching had become more about connection than curriculum over the years. At one point, James looked at her and said, "You always had a way of seeing people, really seeing them." "I remember that." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the softness in his tone. "I think you give me too much credit," she said lightly. "No," he replied quietly. "You just don't realize it." There was a brief pause, the kind of silence that carries its own meaning. She looked away, out the window, at the people passing by with umbrellas and paper cups. It was raining again, just like that night after the party. Funny, she thought, how time seemed to circle back in the most unexpected ways. They spoke for nearly an hour, not about anything extraordinary, but about life, the small turns, the moments that shaped who they'd become. Emily found herself laughing easily, feeling lighter than she had in months. And somewhere between the laughter and the quiet pauses, she realized that what she felt wasn't about James at all. It was about remembering a part of herself she had let fade, the version of Emily who was curious, open, and quietly hopeful. When the cafe began to empty, James glanced at his watch and smiled. "I should let you go," he said gently, "but I'm glad we ran into each other." "Me too," she said softly. And she meant it. As they stood to leave, there was a moment, brief but clear, when their eyes met again. No words passed, but something did, an understanding that whatever connection they shared, it was rooted not in longing but in mutual respect, in gratitude for being seen, even if just for a moment. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. They stepped onto the sidewalk together before parting ways, he toward the station, she toward the parking lot. Emily watched him go, the faint rhythm of his footsteps fading into the distance. Then she turned her face toward the sky, letting the drizzle touch her skin. It felt cool, cleansing, like something quietly resetting inside her. Maybe it wasn't fate or coincidence that brought him back into her life. Maybe it was simply life's gentle reminder that sometimes connections don't have to lead anywhere to mean something. They can simply remind us who we used to be and who we still are. The following week passed quietly, like soft pages turning in a book. Emily didn't realize she was reaching the end of her days, moved as they always did, morning coffee with Mark before work, students' laughter in the hallways, quiet dinners at home where the television filled the silence between them. Yet, inside, something had shifted. The conversation at the cafe had opened a small window in her heart, letting light in where shadows had quietly lived. It wasn't about James, not really. It was about what he'd unknowingly reminded her of, the person she used to be, the one who paid attention to the world, who dreamed without fear of disappointment, who looked for beauty in small, ordinary things. One evening, as the sky turned gold outside their kitchen window, Emily found herself standing beside Mark while he typed on his laptop at the counter. The glow from the screen lit his face, focused, serious, distant. "Do you ever miss the way we used to be?" she asked softly. Mark looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "Before work got busy. Before everything started to feel like a routine we're just keeping up." He blinked, processing her words. "I guess I haven't thought about it," he admitted. "Things changed, sure. But that's life, isn't it?" Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes I wonder if we stopped noticing each other along the way." Mark leaned back, studying her face as if really seeing her for the first time in a while. "You've seemed distant lately," he said quietly. "I thought it was just work stress." She shook her head. "Not distant, just quiet. I think I've been trying to remember who I am, not just who I am with you." There was no anger in her voice, only honesty, soft and clear, like water finding its way back to the sea. Mark closed his laptop. The sound of the click felt louder than it should have. "Emily," he began, his tone careful but sincere, "I know I've been busy. I know I haven't been here in the way you need me to be." She met his eyes, steady and kind. "I'm not blaming you," she said. "We both let the noise of life take over. I just think maybe we can start listening again." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the window. Then Mark reached across the counter, resting his hand over hers, something he hadn't done in months. "You're right," he said softly. "And I don't want to keep living on autopilot. I miss us too." It wasn't a grand gesture or a sudden transformation. It was simple, human. The kind of moment where truth doesn't break something, but gently mends it. Later that night, while Mark cleaned the dishes, Emily stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and the stars shimmered faintly above the quiet neighborhood. She thought of James, not with longing, but with gratitude. She realized that his presence had come at the right time, not to stir confusion, but to remind her of what she still wanted from life: connection, honesty, warmth. And perhaps, without even knowing it, he had helped her remember the language of emotional truth, the kind that starts small, in everyday moments and grows into something healing. The next morning, Emily wrote James a short message. Asterisk, it was good seeing you again. Thank you for reminding me to listen to my own heart again. He replied a few hours later. I'm glad we met too, Emily. Some conversations stay with us for a reason. Take care of yourself. Asterisk, no promises. No unfinished tension. Just kindness to people quietly acknowledging that some connections exist to guide us back to ourselves weeks later. Emily and Mark took a short weekend trip. Nothing fancy, just a drive to the coast. They walked along the shoreline, their shoes sinking slightly into the wet sand. For the first time in a long while, they talked about everything, about dreams, about the people they used to be, about how they wanted to grow from here. As the sun dipped behind the waves, Emily felt something gentle settle inside her, a peace that didn't come from answers, but from understanding. She knew now that love wasn't about constant excitement or perfect moments. It was about showing up again and again, even after years of silence, ready to rebuild what time had softened. That night, back at the hotel, she wrote in her journal something she hadn't done in ages. Asterisk, sometimes life sends you a mirror disguised as a person, not to change your path, but to help you see where you've stopped walking with your own heart. And when you finally remember, you can choose to begin again. Asterisk. Emily smiled as she closed the notebook. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, endless and calm. She felt lighter somehow, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood that the truest kind of love begins with awareness, honesty, and quiet courage. And though she might never forget that unexpected conversation after the party, she would always remember it not as a secret, but as a turning point, the moment she found her way back to herself.